What is up, guys? We're back here with book club number 4. It's either number 4 or number 5. Of course, we're talking about Devin Olsen's Tactical Fly Fisher, the book. That's what we are reading. We are now in chapter 3, which is Euro Nymphing, a competitive breakthrough. That's the name of the chapter. It's a big chapter, and for a lot of good reasons. Euro nymphing is a very complex and highly effective skill if you learn it properly, and I have not gotten through the whole chapter yet. Basically, in this video, I want to break down the differences between babber fishing, strike indicator fishing, versus Euro nymphing, which, I just have some colored line here, which is using a colored piece of line, colored piece of section as your sighter. In the most general sense, that's what it is. But just want to go through some pros and cons between Euro nymphing and between suspension fishing or indicator fish, whatever you want to do. He calls it suspension fishing in the book because when you follow competitive rules, like I often do, you can't actually attach a strike indicator to your line. It's illegal. It's against the rules. So we suspend our flies with like a bobber fly or like a chubby cherry noble, even sometimes like yarn just tied on a hook or any other dry flies. That's why it's called suspension fishing for that. But breaking down the pros and cons of Euro nymphing and suspension nymphing. So the biggest pro for Euro nymphing is strike detection. So essentially when you're Euro nymphing, your line is a tight line. That's why it's also often called tight line nymphing. Your line is tight like this, and you're in direct contact with your flies. And so you can see this yellow line pretty good on the screen. And so if you see this, this is flowing downstream like this. If you see it hesitate upstream, or you see or maybe your sighter's a little bent and it goes straight, or you even feel it with the line, then you know that that is a fish, or you see that it's a fish. And it's harder with an indicator because if you have an indicator on this, you have to wait for you have to wait for the flies to sink, and two, this has to be pulled tight because you don't know what kind of current is doing with this. This has to be pulled tight before your bobber ever moves. So sometimes you get a late strike detection. Sometimes the takes are not strong enough to pull your bobber under, and they're not strong enough. So sometimes there's just a slight hesitation in your bobber, or this or that. It's a lot harder to detect strikes with this than it is with this. Also, fishing this in a straight line like this underneath your rod tip, there's no need for mending because your line is not ever really touching the water. If this is your leader and you're holding your leader up off the water like this, if your line's touching the water, you're doing something very wrong. So there's no need to mend this. And when you're indicator fishing, obviously you have to mend a lot more. I mean, you can high stick it to keep as much line off the water as possible, but ultimately, if this is on the water, this is going to be somewhat near your fly line, and you're at least going to have part of your leader on the water. So there's potential for that current to pull your leader or your line every which way. So you're going to have to mend. You're going to have to make sure this isn't dragging your flies down and having a non-dead drift if that's what you're trying to obtain. And another big pro to Euro nymphing is hook to land ratio. And it all comes with this increased strike detection. With this instant strike detection where this gets pulled, this gets stopped, this gets straightened, as soon as it's hitting, you're getting as quick as possible strike detection. And so that means better hookups, and better hookups mean better landing ratios. And with this, like I said, we said decreased strike detection, a need to mend. Sometimes the fish take on a mend and you don't get the best hook set. So sometimes you lose fish because you're not always in direct contact with your flies. And Euro nymphing, the last pro, there's more pros than that, but the last main pro is you can fish a variety of water types with this. Shallow or deeper, you can all adjust by how much sighter you hold off the water, how much you let it in the water. You can fish very shallow with this. With 1 leader, you can fish very shallow, and you can also fish really deep depending on how much tippet you have below your sighter. With an indicator, super shallow, like pockets or riffles, this becomes very problematic in like a 6-inch deep hole like this, because your indicator's here, your flies are here, and if the water's clear, the fish are seeing this. Plus, when this is smacking the water, it's going to scare some fish. So No es bueno for super low water. Scary. Fish can see it. You're likely going to put down some fish. Uh, these indicators are nice, these Loctite ones, because you can unscrew them and slide them up and down. So these are a little bit easier for changing depths and whatnot. But even getting to those really shallow depths, something like this is not super ideal for that, as a Euro nymphing leader is, where you can just hold your rod higher or drop it lower, or suck in some line or let it out to change your depth and fish a variety of water types. But, that's the pros of Euro nymphing, but there's also pros to using this thing. There's pros to fishing the babber, there's pros to using the indicator, and the biggest pro is greater radius or distance at presentation. There's a lot of times where this will outfish this, and that's because you have to be relatively close to the fish to get this tight. If you're fishing 40 feet away, odds are you're not going to be very tight, and your leader's going to have some slack, or your arm's going to be fatigued, and you're going to be shaking up and down. You're not going to be able to detect your strike that well. So you need to throw this indicator so you can get a nice drift on a far seam, something away from you, and then you can just mend it to keep it at a dead drift and fish a ways away from you. Also, this is fishing an indicator is better for slow water. Leading your sighter through the water, like I said, arm fatigue. If you're leading super slow, you might get some shoulder fatigue and you're bouncing up and down a little bit. That's not super natural. Plus, you might be bouncing it and missing a take potentially, and that's no es bueno. You don't want that. But fishing this in slow water, your flies can sink, get to a nice depth, and usually in slower water, there's not that much difference between surface current and bottom current, so you get a nice drift all the way through there. Plus, slower water is typically deeper water, so you can fish, it's easier to fish a variety of different column of water if your indicator is holding, suspending one fly and laying the other one down at the bottom, depending on how you position your nymphs on your Euro rig. I put my heaviest on the tag and my lighter one on the point, um, but I get much more difference in depth when I'm suspension fishing. Also, it's less physically demanding because when you are Euro nymphing, you do have to get relatively close to the fish, so you have to be a lot more aggressive wading. Not that I've never been aggressive wading indicator fishing, but you do need to be a lot closer when you're indicator fishing. Also, what we talked about, better for slow water, especially now in the fall, whether if you're out west or even here in the east now, water is extremely low. It's been extremely dry summer, and we're still waiting for fall, winter water levels to rise here in the east. Plus, low water typically occurs in the fall and the winter in the west. So, but for these slow water conditions, when you're Euro nymphing, you might not be able to get that close to the fish because the water's so low, it's so clear, you risk spooking them. And if it's slow and clear, you need that greater radius, you need that greater distance presentation. Where maybe you're probably not throwing something like this, because in slow water, this splats, bounces, makes all kinds of racket, and you're scaring the fish everywhere. But maybe you're using a light dry fly, a smaller, size 16, size 18 caddis, and suspending, a midge pupa below that, or just a small light nymph. And this is actually a technique I used in Montana when I was there a couple weeks ago. Using, I actually used it up to I think I used a size 12 caddis fly, and then I just had a little nymph below it. But just being able to get that farther presentation and more delicate strike detection from like a dry fly versus that big heavy babber. But just adding distance to that presentation, keeping distance from the fish, in that situation where even in some riffles, um, I mean, and riffles are nice because you can get close and the water distorts them so they block your image. But in those flat waters and those flat pockets, the fish can really see you in the low and shallow water. So it's important to have a technique that you can use, and that's where suspension or indicator nymphing comes in handy and outfishes Euro nymphing a lot of the times. So that's going to do it for my breakdown on, I guess, book club 4 or 5. Again, I have no idea, and this is coming out late, so whatever. But I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you all learned something. If you did, please comment below. If you have anything else to add, I know I didn't hit everything that there is. Please let me know. If you did enjoy the video, put a thumbs up on it. subscribe as always, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Tight lines.